Welcome everyone to what may very well be the last of the Dark Elf painting guides. And the last figures on the block to paint are the Warlocks. And we're starting off with painting the horses using a 50-50 mix of Vallejo Game Colors Stormy Blue mixed with black. And this color is extremely dark. It's almost similar to the black, but I tried painting the next step over straight black and it just didn't work out. So just a heavy dry brush of this before moving on to our main highlighting colors for our horses. Since we're working with such a dark color, we're moving straight into the highlighting now by using Game Color Stormy Blue, straight this time, not mixed with black. And we're keeping the highlights fairly minute, working already on the small details. I'm not highlighting large surface areas here because we're going to try a slight glowing effect on this Nightmare steed. So just tops of the muscles and here and there, concentrating on the top of the rump, for example. If you concentrate on the area, that's the most prominent area, you'll start seeing the highlights coming through. The next layer is Stormy Blue mixed with a little bit of Magic Blue, and just repeating the highlights. Paint's very thin because I don't want a sharp contrast line on this. We're looking for a soft glow over a majority of the horse. And then we repeat the process one final time with one final highlight with a little bit of more Magic Blue added to it, just adding a spot of color here and there. The goal here is to achieve a subtle glow effect to the horse. The rest of the glowing features will be handled by the other colors such as the mane and the tail. Speaking of the mane and the tail, we're going to move on to that now. I actually started off with a base coat of the Magic Blue, which was a bit unnecessary since I covered it all up with Game Color Electric Blue, so you can easily skip the Magic Blue. But for this purpose, we're going to assume we have a base coat of Electric Blue and work our way up from there. Painting the rest of the tail and the mane is simple, also repetitive. Added a little bit of white to the Electric Blue, actually a fair amount of white, and just concentrating semi-dry brushing on the base of the tail, and more brushing as we get towards the end of the tail, essentially, so we get a dark to light scheme. And we're going to be repeating that process a couple times here. Next, we add more white to the previous mixture and just continue working our way further down towards the end of the tail and the tips of the mane. And the idea here is we're getting a sort of blue fire glow effect, so the flames turn to white as they move further away from their, well, let's call it source, the source horse. There you go. To give an ethereal look to it, you know, turning into wisps of smoke or something to that effect. And then we finish off with one final highlight just on the very end of the tail and the tips of the mane, almost pure white here. This is a lot more contrast than I would normally use for a miniature, but we're trying to get a sort of fire glow effect here, so that's the reason for the unusual amount of high contrast on this area. I will also briefly mention that the hooves and horns on the horse are handled pretty much in the same way as the hair. The only exception being that the paint is a little bit thicker on the hooves because I'm going for a textured look, like the hooves are cracked or something. Also, a few less steps on the hooves because it's a smaller area, just Magic Blue to Electric Blue to Electric Blue and White. For the runes, I'm using a mix of Magic Blue and Electric Blue, and I'm purposely letting it bleed out along the edges a little bit in order to enhance the glow effect. So this paint is a little bit thicker than it would normally be if I was painting something that was recessed like this. And then afterwards I go over it with a mix of Electric Blue and White, which is much thinner, which fills in the cracks a bit more. So we have a bit of that darker blue on the outside and the lighter blue on the inside to give a good glow effect. The skin of the rider is a mix of Vallejo game color Hexed Lichen mixed with Pale Flesh, and there's only a little bit of Hexed Lichen here because we're dealing with a very dark color and a very light color, and adding a little bit of Hexed Lichen really darkens the Pale Flesh. So this is currently, I would say, about 60% Pale Flesh to about 30% Hexed Lichen. That previous layer takes care of our shade layer, and now we can start working on the base coat. Fairly simple, just mix in more Pale Flesh to the previous mixture and leave the previous color in the recesses. I probably should have painted the torsos separately, and instead of gluing them on the horse, mount them on some paper clips or something like that, but I didn't for some reason. It would have been a lot easier if I did. Working on the highlights now, very simple, just add more Pale Flesh to the previous mixture, and once again working on an overhead lighting scheme based on the idea that the light's coming from the top, so we work in a smaller and smaller area, working into a central point on each of the muscles until we work up to our final highlight. Adding another highlight by mixing in more Pale Flesh, and the paint here is fairly thin if you can see the palette here. As always, thinning your paint does make the highlights more subtle and the transition between colors smoother, and the results usually better. So you can use thicker paint if you wish, which makes the painting go quicker, but the results do suffer if you do use thicker paint. And then finally, one final top highlight. Once again, more Pale Flesh added. Not quite straight Pale Flesh here, but close to it. And as you can see, we're just adding essentially very small dots here and there, tips of the area where the light would catch. So the eyebrows, the chin, the nose, the cheekbones, top of the ears, the knuckles, a couple of like the bicep muscles, but that is it. The very last thing to do is add a thin purple ink wash, just to the areas where I think needs a bit more contrast, mainly to the fingers and the areas of the face, the mouth, the eyes, and the inside of the ears, and also edging a few areas where the flesh meets another item, a non-flesh item, for example, the belt. I came up with a pretty good paint recipe for a worn leather look to all the various leather straps on this guy. First undercoated with Vallejo Model Color Camo Black Brown, mainly just to cover up any splashes from previous layers of paint. The main base color here is Vallejo Model Color Leather Brown. And then we do a edge highlight by mixing in some Vallejo Model Color Yellow Ochre and Game Color Leather Brown. So that's Model Color Leather Brown for the base, Game Color Leather Brown, one of the two highlight colors. And we're just going around and mainly just hitting the edges So this is a fairly simple, pretty much two-tone paint scheme here. And then we finish it all off with a wash of Armypainter Dark Tone, which puts a nice sort of matte muted look to it, which gives it that kind of worn leather look. It does darken quite a bit, so that's why you have to kind of overemphasize the highlights. But it's very quick and fairly effective. And then continuing on with the Armypainter tones, the armor was base coated with Vallejo Model Air steel and then covered with that same Armypainter dark tone. And at the time I originally did these models, this is actually the second batch, I was playing around with these Armypainter tones, seeing what I can do with them. They are good with the right application. Like most inks, it's better on a textured surface, so they worked okay on the large steel plate where I could move them around a bit more, not so much on the sword. I do have to go back and fix it, but I wanted to leave this as is so you can decide if you want to use them yourself or not. After painting the gold trim, I went back and used standard Vallejo Black ink thinned to add a bit more contrast to that deep recessed area between the trim and the armor on the chest plate of the horse. But with that, we are done. I did skip a few items here that's already been covered in other videos. You can find a link to those down below. But yeah, this is it. And there we have our finished Warlocks. Had to paint 10 of these guys. I wish I had a bit more time to paint them. I would have added a bit more detail or a bit more careful painting some of the details. But anyway, with that, we are done with the Warlocks. And more than likely, we are done with the Dark Elves project, painting all these guys up. Majority of what I have left to paint is just duplicates of what I've already put up on YouTube. The only exception being the Hydra and the Charybdis, which I really don't care for play-wise, so I don't know if I'll ever get to those. But this is likely going to be it, at least till 9th edition. I'll see what happens there if I start adding or removing more models, depending on what's in the new edition. But thanks for watching this series. I'm going to pull the plug here, call it quits. But we got a lot more different interesting items coming up in 2005, and by pushing the Dark Elves off the table, we're going to be able to work on some other things, more interesting things that have less purple in them. So see you then. Thanks for watching.